Environmental Defense Fund and CNBC-TV18 present Climate Tech Convening India 2025 in association with Climate Collective.
Thanks a lot for joining in, on this discussion. Well, Burgess, let's start off with you first. I wanted some clarity on a couple of aspects. You'd like to get the triple win. That's increased incomes, improved yields, and climate benefits as well. How do you go about this? How do you think we can achieve the triple win?
Thanks, Nigel. I think there are a few things that are very important. One is that we need intensive agriculture. A lot has been written about, intensive versus extensive systems. I think intensive is really the need of the hour. We have to keep our forest lands how they are, and whatever agri-land we have, we need to maximize productivity on that. And there are many ways to do that, and of course we have to do that sustainably. We need to use chemical inputs, biological inputs, and to have integrated pest management, integrated sources of fertilizer, combining chemical fertilizer, manure together to get the maximum kind of output. So that is very important. We've got to keep our forests as they are so that they can sequester carbon and use agri-land to maximize output. The other thing is that we have to use water sustainably. We have to cut down on our use of water. So for example, if you were to switch from flood irrigated rice to these direct seeded dryland rice varieties, you can cut down your water by about 30%. So that is so valuable. So let's think about how we can use water in a more efficient manner. That's really what I'd focus on for this part.
There'll be various challenges in everything. And I want to ask you, what's the unique challenges of building or investing in climate tech for agriculture? If you could, help us out with that.
Look, agriculture and climate are interrelated, right?
And more importantly, how do you overcome them? There'll be
Sure.
challenges, but if you could give us some insight on that.
Look, agriculture and climate are interrelated. Agriculture uses 83 or 85% of total fresh water usage by mankind. So saving a glass of water is not going to help us out, but if you reduce 20% usage of agriculture water, you save a lot of water. Mm-hmm. Issues like soil becoming rocks. We are seeing in states of Punjab where because of excessive usage of chemicals and not being able to absorb, the soil quality is getting degraded. Earth is losing like 20% of soil. Earth's soil is getting bad. At the same time, we have issues of climate change because whatever the reason is, right? Agriculture, while it's a victim for climate change, is also one of the biggest contributors of climate change, right? We create a lot of climate, methane gas emissions, CH4 emissions, because of agriculture sector, right? Our food habits also decide how the climate change happens. So I think it's all related. and it's very difficult because for a lot of people, agriculture, when they want to eat food, it's simple. You go to buy a big bazaar or a supermarket and you buy it, right? But what goes behind it, how many people are working? It's easy to say that we have to change agriculture practices, but you have 130 million families in India dependent on agriculture. Even if you want with the best of intentions, everyone on the panel is doing with the best of intentions, it's not easy to change the practices.
Janesh, during the course of the day for around 5 hours odd, I cover the livestock markets. So I'm more interested in the cash flows, the profit and loss, etc. But typically, what's the ticket size if someone is looking to put in money? As you said, there are various challenges. People are not willing to stay in there for the longer term, and you're getting most of the funding at times from outside India. So at rough ticket size, what would it be?
Look, now on average, we put like $4 to $5 million of startup when we, as a first round of investment. The round is probably $6 to $7 million we generally lead. But now, so that's where the round sizes are now becoming like traditional VC investment style, right? But when we started out, I used to get one third of a company at 5 crore rupees of investment, right? Those have really changed out. So things are getting more normal, looking like more VC investment style,
All right, Burgess, coming back to you then. How can we transform the food systems to enhance climate resilience and ensure food security, especially in the face of climate change, whether I'm talking about floods, heat waves as well?
So there are a number of ways we need to do that. I'd say technology is, of course, extremely important, both on the seed side and on the irrigation and other sorts of input side. So let's take seeds, for example. We need more heat-resistant varieties, drought-resistant varieties. If you look at where breeding is, it's mostly focused on herbicide tolerance, insect resistance, but how can we change that to develop more climate-resistant varieties? So that is extremely important. Financial inclusion, very important. We need to give farmers access to insurance that helps them in climate-vulnerable environments. You know, if the private sector is not willing to come in, if there isn't a model for that, let's see what sort of government models are available. So those are really key. And then drip irrigation, of course, extremely important, extremely efficient way of giving water to crops.
Well, let's focus on a couple of other aspects then. Nidhi, I'm coming back to you. If you could help us out with how can regenerative farming practices help safeguard soil health and also contribute to a radical transformation in agriculture to meet India's growing food demand? If you could help us out with that.
Because from where I come, which is basically using technology to ensure that we are able to reach the farmer and help the farmer increase their income, I'll just slightly change my answer, because while, yes, we as an organization work on regenerative agriculture, and I think there's enough studies and there's assumption that regenerative agriculture helps in increasing the soil health in terms of better water management. And I think somebody gave the example that if there was, if a particular set of farmers are using, moving to millets, like we in Digital Green, we are working in Orissa, we work with the Orissa Millet Mission, where we are encouraging more and more farmers to use millet, right? So that is, again, from a point of view of increasing the soil health, right? Which for one, which in the long run will increase their soil health, conserve the water, but also help them to increase their income and have more sustainable income. So it is linked to that. But for us as an organization, and I want to highlight that, because how is that, yes, we all understand that it helps to increase the soil health, the water, the overall impact on the climate, but what is important is that how does a farmer understand that, right? Because, we all are talking about, yes, this is the need of the hour, but we also need to understand that what is the need for the farmer, right? Yes. So the small and a marginal farmer needs more income, more sustainable income. So you need to convince the farmer that how does moving to this practice will help you to have more sustainable income in the long run. How does it help to regenerate your soil quality? How does it help you in conserving water? For that, the farmer needs to be armed with information, right? Indeed. And that's what our agenda is, and that's why I want to stress on that we use technology, we use AI to make sure that you get very localized, very hyper-local, contextual information, which helps the farmers to take very important decisions when they are planting a particular crop. So it is just to say, yes, regenerative farming helps you to have more income in the long run, but they need the proof of the practice, right? So, but for that, they need information, they need advisory.
Good evening, everyone. I think we've got the last half an hour, 45 minutes, so request your attention because this is going to be quite an interesting one. Well, let's start off with Dr. Jyoti. The first question comes across to you. What role do domestic partnerships and collaborations play in India's green transition?
Public-private partnerships are very important, and public partnerships, by that you can mean several things. Public policy, you need government support, and government has to give pricing policy signals, incentives, and tax breaks, and so on. Also, star labeling and this type of innovations that government can promote can also help in people doing better and better. Also, you can talk about people. Public means people, and this whole climate transition is about energy going to people. Earlier, energy was a big people's game, and there were 7 sisters and so on. And now it has come down to many small players, and these small players have to get together and to solve the problem.
What more you think can be done on the R&D front? Clearly, I think we're lacking a little bit with regard to climate change and even otherwise. So your take on that, R&D spends.
So I think since I represent, I think the software industry here, probably the minority, right? Let me talk a little bit about how software can then influence R&D spend, right? R&D spend will make sense if you expect investors to invest more, obviously they need to see the return on investment. With climate tech, this is a big problem because the tenure is huge, right? You're talking about 10, 20 years, you don't see any return, right? So where can software kind of plug this gap, right? So the concepts like carbon accounting, for example, right, in which you're really treat carbon like currency, right, like how you treat finance. If you have softwares and policy mandates that help you measure this, right, then you can clearly see where you stand and then you can look at what you can act at. But it's not such simple because then you need data, right? What we are looking at largely is at least large corporates within their own operations, Scope 1 and 2, they're able to calculate. Scope 3 is a huge problem because we are all in a mindset of competition, right? We have to maximize profit. We have to, I feel we have to step away a little bit from that and get into a more collaboration over competition, right? You figured out how to do Scope 1 and 2 within your walls. Why don't you involve the ecosystem a little bit more and teach those processes, teach those ways to patent IP maybe, right? Mentoring capabilities, even funding, yeah, to some extent.
All right, so Shweta, let me come across to you then, and if you could comment on this, how do we get better partnerships going between Indian R&D shops, the governments, as well as corporates?
I think as India, we have come a long way from Shastri ji's Jai Jawan, Jai Kisan to Modi ji's Jai Vigyan and Jai Anusandhan. I think we've done fairly well for ourselves. So we must pat our backs. Having said that, you were asking her the number. Let me give you this number. The best investment that as a government we did into R&D was in the year 2018, which was 0.8% of the GDP. Otherwise, we are usually in the range of 0.6% to 0.7% of the GDP. World over, the world average is about 1.7%, right? And countries like the United States of America or Japan does about 4% to 5% of their GDP. Having said that, there is another number that I want to give you. In India, the corporate sector contributes to only 37% of the R&D spend in the entire GDP, whereas this number is about 75% in the US and about 80% in Japan. So what we are looking at, we need to understand this, that until these three things don't come together, the corporate sector, the higher educational institute, that means the academia, and because see, academia will give you the width, the scope, right? The corporates will actually give you the length of the entire R&D scope. And it is the government that gives you the depth. Until the depth, the width, and the length does not come together, the body of the entire work of R&D does not come together. Hence, I personally feel that the collaboration, also another thing that I have to point out here is that India, the mindset and the behavior for R&D is extremely STEM-oriented. When we look at 22nd century challenges, we need to understand that interdisciplinary way of looking at things needs to be achieved. And hence, it is important for a lot of corporates in various segments to come together with the government. The government is like a white elephant, right? It takes time to sit down, it takes time to stand up. And we have done fairly well as far as policy is concerned. For example, the Anusandhan Research Fund is there, which understands that there is a gap. I myself understand that there is, if the world average, if the global average is about 1.7% of the GDP, we will get there the way we are growing. But then the fact is, it is important for us to get into the entire body of R&D to actually get into usability, to understand the use cases. It is important that all these three people come together, and then only we will see India progressing as far as the grassroots innovation and R&D is concerned.
What steps should be taken to strengthen the intellectual property projections to ensure safety of indigenous climate innovations?
Okay, so that's a little digress from what we've been talking about. So when we say indigenous technologies, I think there are, again, there are obvious statements which I could make, like we need IP policies, we need a better governance, all that. But I think the basic thing which is required is a database. Okay, we need to have a database. We need to have a database of the prior art and the inventions in such a way that it is available access to the public, so that there is no chance of any repatenting or any cheating there. And it should be recognized at least by globally. So it's very important that we take care of that first thing. Having done that, okay, it's also very important to have then special IP offices or something like that, where then we know how to do it. And very importantly, the definition of patentable, that patentable definition is very, very important. And I'll give you one example. So, I just recently met one person from Pune, and who said, Anuradha, when I get a cold, I take that particular blanket, which is traditionally made out of saris of my mother. Okay? Now that means a lot. You see, it's a tradition, it's a recycle, it's an art, which is not patented. And how do you patent it? So the definition of patentable for indigenous traditional technologies need to be seriously looked at. And that, imagine, I think Rahul said or someone, you just trace it back. That's one of a very good recycling technologies, very good for climate change. It's neither warm nor very cold. It's a brilliant thing. Similarly, Leh Ladakh. Now, we are talking about so much renewable energy there, but I read an article where they said they have a traditional way of making houses, okay, which keeps them warm. How do we forget that? But how do you patent that? Right? So these are indigenous traditional technologies where we need to redefine the patentable, that word. I think that will help. And then you have a database. And then, of course, we have funding, and then we have awareness, and then we have IP offices. All that follows.
I wanted your view on this. Going by all that you were saying, there's obviously a big demand for green jobs here in India. But there it appears, some reports indicate that there's a gap, talent gap out there. So, what can be done to fix that gap?
You're talking about jobs, but where do you want these jobs? Do you want these jobs to actually happen in Mumbai? We are already falling apart in this city. So where do you want these jobs? You want these jobs in remote parts of India. You don't want people to be coming here. They want to be where they live. So there is something called a tree, which God has actually come up with, which is probably the best machine to take carbon out. Now, the unfortunate reality is, or fortunate reality is, the Europeans were very smart. They came up with voluntary carbon thought process to help the net zero transition, or at least those who cannot use the technology to meet that. So I have been trying to copy that, and we have actually launched a company called Avishkar Carbon, trying to essentially grow trees, but do that in very remote parts of India where people live. Give them science to grow trees in such a manner that they can actually last 20, 30, 40 years. The tree belongs to them. The fruit belongs to them. The timber belongs to them. They just don't need to cut it. Their role is to actually grow it on their land, keep it there, and then all the millions of dollars, and just to give you an idea, for 5,000 hectares, we need to actually roughly invest around $15 million to plant. This $15 million money will come from outside India, and we can procure billions and billions of dollars which will come in. And those who are actually looking to take the money back, they will not take the dollar back. I mean, RBI is right now struggling to keep the dollar in. You would actually trade the voluntary carbon and pay them out while leaving the asset here. Now, where will this magic? Of course, the Europeans came up with it. I didn't come up with it. But I have copied it, and I have understood it. I genuinely believe this is one of the best ways for countries like India to prosper. Create green jobs, not necessarily to actually build the most fancy Tesla car here, but just growing trees. 40, 50% of this country still live in the remote part. And you can do it while earning billions of dollars to come in. That will actually change the RBI governor's biggest problem. So I think there are wonderful solutions that are available. which can simultaneously be taken care of, which can make this country go forward, create jobs where people live, and at the same time solve some of the financial fiscal problems that the country is dealing with.
Okay, all right. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for joining in.
Environmental Defense Fund and CNBC-TV18 present Climate Tech Convening India 2025 in association with Climate Collective.